Hey Reddit. Throwaway account because some of my friends lurk here, and I'm honestly embarrassed to admit my marriage is falling apart. I'm 34M. My wife is 32F. We've been together 9 years, married almost 6. From the outside everything looks solid. Shared apartment, a cat, travel plans, regular dinners with friends. But over the last 6 months something shifted, and for way too long I convinced myself I was just overthinking. She's always been sharp-tongued, brutally direct, sometimes harsh even over small stuff. I used to chalk it up to stress and a demanding job. Then little inconsistencies started piling up. Stories that didn't line up, constant. You're imagining things. Whenever I asked simple questions, and this cold distance that wasn't there before, she began keeping her phone face down, stepping out for a quick coffee, and coming back 3 hours later. And me, like a cliché, I kept choosing to believe every explanation she gave. The worst part was how tense our communication became. It felt like walking on thin ice all the time. Any normal question could turn into a full-blown argument. I started catching myself staying quiet just to avoid being called paranoid or exhausting. At that point, I had no idea this was just the beginning, and that very soon something would happen that would force me to rethink our entire life together. So here's where things started getting weird fast. About 2 weeks after I first noticed the distance, she suddenly became overly nice for a few days, cooking dinner, sending random "miss you" texts, even suggesting a weekend trip. I remember thinking, okay, maybe I really was overthinking. Yeah, that feeling didn't last long. One night she said she had a late work meeting. Nothing unusual, except she forgot her old tablet at home. It kept lighting up with notifications. I tried to ignore it for like an hour because I didn't want to be that guy. But the screen showed a name I didn't recognize, followed by a heart emoji. Then another message popped up. "Miss you already." My stomach just dropped. I unlocked the tablet. We'd always shared passcodes before, and there it was. A chat thread going back months. Inside jokes I'd never heard. Complaints about me. Plans that didn't match anything she'd told me. A bunch of "can't wait to see you again" messages. No graphic details or anything, but it was obvious this wasn't just a coworker grabbing coffee. The craziest part? While I was staring at the screen, she texted me saying the meeting was going long, and she might stay overnight at a coworker's place because it was closer to the office. I literally had the messages open showing she was somewhere else entirely. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinets, heart racing so hard I thought I might throw up. My brain kept jumping between denial, maybe there's an explanation, and this cold, sinking realization that nothing about the last few months made sense anymore. And then, because apparently the universe wanted to pile it on, about 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. I kind of wish I hadn't. So yeah, I picked up the unknown number. On the other end was a guy, awkward, nervous voice, asking if I was my name. My brain instantly went into fight or flight mode. Turns out he was the boyfriend of the woman my wife had told everyone she was staying with for work. He said he found messages on his partner's phone mentioning my wife and thought I deserved to know. We compared notes for maybe 15 minutes that felt like an hour. Dates lined up. Excuses lined up. Even some of the same lies word for word. Apparently my wife and his partner had been covering for each other for months. Fake work trips. Girls' nights. All of it. While I'm sitting there staring at this chat thread, realizing I wasn't crazy. I was just being played. Right after that call ended, my wife texted again. Meeting finally over. Crashing at Anna's. Phone dying. Love you. Meanwhile, I had literal proof she wasn't anywhere near Anna's place. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept rereading everything, the messages, the call logs, the tiny details I'd ignored before. Suddenly every weird mood swing, every random fight, every last-minute schedule change snapped into place like a messed-up puzzle. Around 3 a.m., I made a decision. I wasn't going to explode over text or pretend I didn't know. I wanted to look her in the eye and hear what she'd say when she couldn't hide behind a screen. So I waited. She came home the next afternoon acting completely normal, dropped her bag, complained about how exhausting the meeting was, and asked why I looked tired. That moment, watching her lie so casually, something inside me just cracked. And that's when the confrontation started. I didn't yell right away. Honestly, I was too numb. I just asked, calm as I could, how was Anna's place? She didn't even hesitate, launched into this detailed story about late-night work drama, bad takeout, how she barely slept. Watching her stack lie on top of lie while I already knew the truth felt surreal. So I slid the tablet across the table. At first she froze. Then came the classic rapid-fire reactions, denial. That's just a friend. Anger. Why are you snooping? Then turning it back on me. You've been distant too, you know. Within minutes the conversation went from tense to explosive. She kept interrupting, raising her voice, calling me paranoid even with the messages right there in front of her. When I mentioned the phone call from the other guy, her whole expression changed. For a split second, she looked genuinely scared, then immediately defensive. She said it was complicated, that I didn't understand, that nothing serious was happening. Every answer felt like a half-truth wrapped in another excuse. The hardest moment was when I asked a simple yes or no question. Did you lie to me for months? She didn't answer directly, just shrugged and said, you wouldn't have handled the truth well. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Not an apology. Not even regret, just justification. The argument went in circles for hours. She alternated between cold silence, sharp insults, and sudden attempts to downplay everything like it wasn't a big deal. Meanwhile, I felt my chest tightening, hands shaking, trying to hold onto some version of reality while it kept slipping through my fingers. Eventually the yelling stopped, not because anything was resolved, but because we were both completely drained. She locked herself in the bedroom. I sat alone in the living room staring at the wall, realizing the real emotional fallout hadn't even started yet. The first couple of days after the confrontation felt like living in a fog. I barely remember eating or sleeping. My brain kept replaying the same scenes over and over. The messages, the lies, the way she shrugged when I asked if she'd been dishonest for months. I'd catch myself staring at random things, the coffee maker, the cat sleeping on the couch, and suddenly feel this wave of disbelief crash over me. Then the anger kicked in. Not the loud, dramatic kind at first, more like this steady burn under my skin. Every memory started to feel fake. Anniversaries, trips, random nights where she told me she had to work late. I kept wondering how many moments I thought were real were actually built on lies. I'd find myself pacing the apartment at 2 a.m., thinking about every time she called me paranoid for asking simple questions. She, on the other hand, acted like nothing major had happened. One minute she'd be cold and dismissive. The next she'd try to make small talk about groceries or weekend plans. It messed with my head even more, like we were living in two completely different realities. A couple of times she tried to flip the narrative, saying my constant suspicion pushed her away. Hearing that while I was still processing everything made the anger spike hard. I remember one specific moment. I opened the fridge and saw leftovers from a dinner we'd had a week before everything blew up. She'd laughed that night, held my hand across the table, told me she loved me. And suddenly, I felt this rush of rage so strong I had to step outside just to breathe. Not because I wanted to break anything, but because I didn't recognize my own life anymore. But anger is weird. It burns hot, then it leaves you exhausted. And once that fire started to fade, something heavier crept in underneath. After the anger burned itself out, everything just dropped. The apartment felt quieter than ever, even when she was home. We barely talked unless it was about something practical, and every silence felt heavy. I started waking up way too early with that sinking feeling in my chest, like my body remembered the betrayal before my brain fully caught up. Sadness hit in waves. One minute I'd be okay enough to answer work emails. The next I'd hear a random song we used to listen to on road trips, and have to step away because my throat would tighten. I missed the version of us I thought was real, or maybe just the version I believed in. That's the part that messed with me the most, grieving something that might not have existed the way I imagined. And then came the self-doubt. I kept replaying old conversations, wondering what I missed. Was I too trusting? Too passive when she got sharp or dismissive? Every time she'd called me, paranoid echoed in my head, and I started questioning my own instincts, like maybe I really had been overreacting at first, or maybe I somehow caused this. She wasn't exactly helping. Some days she'd act distant and cold, barely acknowledging me. Other days she'd suddenly try to be affectionate, like nothing happened, which left me even more confused. Once she told me I was dragging things out by being sad, that I should just decide whether I was staying or leaving already. Hearing that while I was still trying to process everything felt like getting the ground pulled out from under me again. I remember sitting on the balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker on, realizing I didn't recognize who I was anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I felt small, uncertain, and completely drained. And that's when I knew I couldn't keep pretending this was just a rough patch we'd magically fix without real change. Something had to shift, either in our marriage or in me. After a week of emotional whiplash, I realized I couldn't keep spiraling alone in my head. I suggested we actually sit down and talk. Not yell, not accuse. Just figure out what was real and what wasn't. She rolled her eyes at first, said we'd already talked enough, but eventually agreed, mostly, I think, because she was tired of the tension in the apartment. We sat at the kitchen table like strangers. I came in with a list of questions because every time we talked before, the conversation went in circles. I asked when it started, how serious it was, whether she ever planned to tell me. Her answers changed depending on the moment. First it was just emotional, then later she admitted they'd met multiple times. One minute she claimed she felt trapped and lonely. The next she said I was overreacting and making everything dramatic. The sudden shifts messed with my head more than the actual details. Every time I thought I had a clear picture, something new came out that contradicted the last version. She'd get defensive fast, sharp tone, sarcastic comments, especially when I pointed out inconsistencies. At one point she laughed nervously and said, "Why does every detail matter so much?" That question hit me like a punch because, to me, every detail was my reality falling apart. There were also these strange moments where she seemed almost vulnerable, admitting she'd been unhappy for a while, that she liked the attention from someone new because it felt easy. For a second I saw a crack in the armor, and then it snapped shut again, replaced by blame or dismissal. It felt like trying to have a conversation with three different versions of the same person. By the end of that night, I wasn't sure I had more answers, but I did have clarity on one thing. Trust wasn't just broken, it was tangled in layers of half-truths and shifting stories. And I was standing there trying to decide if untangling it was even possible, or if I was just prolonging my own pain. That question followed me into the next phase, when outside voices started getting involved, whether I wanted them to or not. Up until that point, I'd kept everything private. I was embarrassed, confused, and honestly still hoping maybe we'd somehow fix things quietly. But secrets have a way of leaking out, especially when two people are walking around tense and miserable all the time. It started when one of my close friends noticed I'd been distant and asked if I was okay. I gave a vague answer at first, but he kept pushing in that gentle, "Dude, I'm worried about you" way. Eventually, I told him a watered-down version of what was happening. Saying it out loud made it feel painfully real, like I couldn't pretend anymore that it was just a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, my wife had apparently told a completely different story to some of our mutual friends. According to them, our marriage had been basically over for months, and I was the one refusing to admit it. Hearing that secondhand felt like another betrayal, like my reality was being rewritten while I was still trying to understand it myself. Then came the sudden moment that really blew things open. The other guy's partner, the one who'd called me, reached out again and asked if I wanted to meet up and compare timelines. I hesitated, but curiosity and the need for clarity won. We met in a quiet cafe, both of us looking exhausted and unsure what to say. Comparing notes was surreal. Dates, locations, little details. So many pieces lined up that it was impossible to deny how long this had been going on. At the same time, hearing someone else's heartbreak mirrored back at me was strangely grounding. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't imagining the inconsistencies. Of course, when my wife found out I'd talked to him, things escalated fast. She accused me of airing private business and said I was trying to turn people against her. The argument that followed was loud, messy, and full of emotions that had been building for weeks. By that point, it was clear we were no longer just two people trying to fix a relationship. We were two opposing versions of the same story, and everyone around us was starting to notice. And that's when I hit another emotional wall, one that forced me to really confront what staying in this marriage was doing to me. By now, the exhaustion wasn't just physical, it had seeped into my bones. Every day felt like walking through fog. I couldn't focus at work. I snapped at the cat, poor thing, and even simple things like making coffee felt like climbing a mountain. The emotional roller coaster had been relentless: shock, rage, disbelief, self-doubt, sadness, and now, numbness. I realized I was constantly scanning her behavior, trying to catch her in a lie, replaying conversations in my head, dissecting every expression. I couldn't stop myself. Every casual, "I love you," from her made my stomach twist, because I didn't know if it was real or just another layer of manipulation. The thing that hit hardest was loneliness. We were in the same apartment, sleeping in the same bed, but the intimacy, the simple trust, the shared little jokes, even just the feeling of being seen, was gone. She was physically present, but emotionally unreachable. I could feel myself fading in the space between us. There was one night I just sat on the couch, stared at the ceiling, and whispered to no one, "I can't do this anymore." But then guilt hit immediately. Guilt for thinking about leaving. Guilt for failing at the life we built. Guilt for even feeling that I deserved better. It was like my brain was under siege from every angle. I knew I had to make a decision, not in anger, not on autopilot, but a deliberate choice. And that meant facing the hardest questions about love, betrayal, and what I was willing to tolerate. The next few days would force me to start defining boundaries, and for the first time, really considering whether we had a future together. After hitting that wall, I spent days replaying everything, trying to map out the options without letting my emotions completely hijack me. It boiled down to basically 3 paths. 1. Try to work on the marriage. That would mean therapy, brutal honesty, rebuilding trust from scratch. I'd have to confront the fact that she'd lied for months and might do it again. I'd have to accept that the old us was gone, maybe forever. 2. Leave. Cut ties, start over, reclaim some dignity. But the thought of ending something I'd invested almost a decade into, our home, the memories, our routines, felt like ripping off a part of myself. 3. Staying in limbo. Pretend it's okay. Keep going day by day without addressing the real issues. Honestly, that was tempting because it was the path of least resistance. But I knew it would slowly kill me inside. I talked to a few trusted friends, vented like crazy, even journaled until my hand cramped. Everyone leaned toward leaving, seeing the betrayal clearly from the outside. But the emotional tug, the shared history, the love I still felt buried under the hurt, kept me tethered. I realized something important. Whatever I chose, I had to own it completely. I couldn't just drift along hoping things would magically fix themselves. That clarity was the first step toward reclaiming myself. By the end of the week, I decided I needed one last conversation with her. Not an argument, not an interrogation, but a boundary setting. This is what I need to even think about staying. Talk. It was terrifying, but necessary. I told her I needed to talk, really talk, without lies or distractions. She sighed, rolled her eyes, muttered something about more drama, but followed me to the living room. This time, I didn't leave room for vague answers. I laid it all out. The messages, the call from the other guy, the lies I caught over months. No yelling. Just facts, calm but firm. Her reaction was predictable, yet still jarring. First came denial. I didn't do anything serious. You're blowing this out of proportion. Then defensiveness, accusations that I was controlling, paranoid, or holding grudges for past mistakes. She tried to flip the script, bring up my faults like they were equal to her betrayal. But I stayed focused. I told her, I can't ignore this. I can't pretend trust didn't break. You lied for months, and nothing short of total honesty and change will fix that. I need to know if you're willing to do that, fully, or if this marriage is done. There was a long pause. Then, in her typical sharp, almost detached way, she said, I don't know if I'm willing to stop lying. Sometimes it's easier to just lie. That hit me like a punch in the chest. No apology, no remorse, just blunt admission. At that moment, everything crystallized. I realized that no amount of therapy, talks, or patience would fix someone unwilling to take responsibility. My heart sank, but a strange clarity settled in. I knew the decision wasn't about anger anymore. It was about self-respect, sanity, and reclaiming my life. I told her calmly, then this is over. I can't stay in a marriage where honesty isn't possible. She shrugged, muttered something about me overreacting, and went to the bedroom. I sat on the couch, feeling hollow and broken, but also, oddly, free. The first few days, after telling her it was over, were surreal. The apartment felt like a war zone, even though nothing had been physically damaged. We still had to coexist for a little while. Bills, pets, practical stuff, but every interaction was tense and clipped. No warmth, no jokes, no pretending. Just silence and the occasional passive-aggressive comment. I cycled through emotions constantly. Shock lingered longer than I expected. I felt hollow, like the betrayal had carved out a part of me. Some moments were filled with anger, remembering her casual lies, her lack of remorse. Other moments were pure sadness, mourning the us that never really existed the way I thought it did. Sleep was almost impossible. Every creak of the apartment, every vibration from her phone made my stomach drop. I replayed old memories, trying to figure out where I went wrong, if I missed signs, if I could have saved this. Rationally, I knew I couldn't have, but emotionally, it was torture. Even mundane things felt like triggers. Seeing her dishes in the sink made me remember nights she came home from late meetings. The cat, normally a comfort, became a tiny reminder that life had moved on around me while I was stuck processing betrayal. And yet, somewhere in the exhaustion, there was a flicker of relief. For the first time in months, I didn't have to monitor her every word, question every story, or doubt every gesture. I could finally start focusing on myself, even if it hurt like hell. After the initial chaos, I started the slow, messy process of putting myself back together. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden epiphanies or cathartic moments. Just small steps that felt impossible at first. I deleted her contact from my phone, blocked social media, and started sleeping in a different room. Even little routines, morning coffee, walking the cat, playlists I hadn't touched in months, became tiny acts of reclaiming my life. Therapy helped. At first, I was hesitant, thinking it'd be just talking in circles, but having someone validate my feelings and guide me through the anger, grief, and guilt was eye-opening. I learned to separate my self-worth from her choices. Her betrayal was not a reflection of me, it was about her. That was hard to internalize but essential. Friends became my lifeline. Some nights we sat around doing nothing, some nights we drank cheap beer and talked for hours. But just knowing people were in my corner reminded me I wasn't alone, and that life could still have laughter, even after this. I also started journaling again, not to analyze her actions, but to track my own emotions. Writing down anger, sadness, tiny victories, or even just, "I survived today," became a way to measure progress. It wasn't linear. Some days I'd spiral back into rage or despair, but each day I felt a little more grounded, a little more like myself. The biggest revelation? I didn't need her to validate my worth or my happiness. That was on me. And it was terrifying, but also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I could see a future that wasn't tied to her lies. Months passed, and the raw edges of betrayal slowly dulled. I won't lie, some days it still stings. Certain songs, scents, or even random memories trigger flashes of anger or sadness. But the constant, gnawing weight? Gone. I finally reached a point where I could think about my life without her being the center of it. I started doing things for myself again, hobbies I'd abandoned, small trips alone, reconnecting with friends I'd neglected. Each tiny step reminded me that life wasn't over because the marriage ended. In fact, it was beginning again in a way that was entirely mine. Closure came not from her, but from myself. I accepted that she wouldn't apologize, wouldn't admit her mistakes fully, and wouldn't provide the answers I wanted. And that was okay. I didn't need her validation to move forward. My peace didn't depend on her. Eventually, I sold the apartment we shared and found a smaller place for just me and the cat. Every corner of the old apartment had been a reminder of lies and betrayal. Now I had a blank space to rebuild my own life. And it felt good. I realized I couldn't control her actions, only how I responded. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was the first real act of self-respect I'd taken in years. And somehow, letting go was the thing that finally let me breathe again. Looking back, this whole experience has been brutal, but it taught me more about myself than I ever expected. I learned that love alone isn't enough. Trust, honesty, and mutual respect are non-negotiable. I also learned how easy it is to rationalize someone else's behavior when you want to believe in them, and how damaging that can be if the truth is something else entirely. Most importantly, I learned that self-respect matters. Walking away from someone who consistently lies and refuses accountability doesn't make you weak or bitter, it makes you brave. It's okay to grieve, to feel anger, to feel sadness, but you have to keep moving forward for yourself. For anyone going through something similar, pay attention to the red flags. Don't ignore your gut. Document what you notice if it helps you see patterns. And lean on people who care about you, friends, family, therapists. You don't have to face betrayal alone. I'm still healing, but I'm finally starting to feel like me again. And for the first time in a long time, I can imagine a future where I trust again, starting with myself.